Well, Scott, thank you for day one at this amazing session that you put together.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Joe, for being here and being part of it. It's really important to us that you're here, the network that you have, the community that you lead, and so thank you for being a part of it.
A lot going on right now in Washington. You know, I like to jump right into our conversations.
Yeah.
We're going to get into ABIA in particular as far as the conference, but we got a lot going on right now in Washington. We got a cycle of an election coming up.
Right.
We've got a presidential cycle, people are already posing on already.
Right.
What does that mean to MedTech?
Well, I'll say this. We have always been a nonpartisan, bipartisan industry and organization, right? But the reality is you have to deal with Washington whether you like it or not, right? And it's part of our lives. We are heavily regulated. We have federal payers that we have to deal with, and then you always have to deal with Congress. So we're dealing with Congress and the White House and all of the agencies now. It's a little dysfunctional, Joe. You know, I've been in that town for 30 years now. I worked on the Hill for 10 at a time in the 90s when it was a little more sane and there was more bipartisanship. There's not a lot of that right now, which makes it kind of hard to get things done on big issues, right? But we're continuing to work our way through. We can come back to this later. But we've gotten one big thing done, which is the MDUFA law that we got passed, which I think is transformative for the industry and how they're regulated. So in spite of the dysfunction you see in Washington, there are things that get done that really matter to MedTech, and that's one of the big ones.
And you've always been masterful, and I think it's because you are bipartisan. You really have never played a side, which is always, as a leader, important. You seem to get very important policies taken care of on the fringes.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard, as you pointed out right now, is to get anything right down the middle.
Yeah.
For optics.
You know, you're exactly right. So what we try to stay focused on is not the politics of DC, but the policy of DC, right? And when you're just focused on policy and policy outcomes, most people in the town understand and appreciate that. When you get caught up in the political wins, that's when a lot of trade associations and organizations get in trouble, right? You start picking winners and losers, you start picking sides. The reason we don't do that, Joe, is really because it's important to our companies that they're successful, and it's important to patients that our companies are successful, right? And if we lose that focus of patients and business, then we'll begin to struggle and fail, as you've seen from many in DC. But we haven't. We've never sort of lost our true north, right? Which are patients and our companies, and as a result of that, we're able to get things done with the infrastructure in DC that's been there for a long time. To me, it's the only way to be effective in that town, to be honest with you. Unless you're a raw politician, you know, the only way to be effective is to stay out of the fray. So,
ABIA was a critical player during the pandemic.
Yes.
You and your team, behind the scenes, Herculean lifts.
Yeah.
Has it changed how you've designed the organization or how you see MedTech and ABIA now moving forward?
It hasn't changed how we designed our organization. We reorganized in the middle of the pandemic to deal with the urgent nature of that crisis, and a lot of our companies did as well, but we've now reverted back to the model we had before organizationally. I'll tell you what has changed though, and I think it's changed for all of us, is we've understood, I think, more clearly, and I think the government understands more clearly, the importance of public-private partnership, right? On the front end and not the back end of either the reimbursement or the regulatory landscape. So you'll see that in the MDUFA agreement, you'll see that in some of the things we're working on with CMS right now, where we're trying to say, listen, we have to work together before it becomes a crisis in order to avoid a crisis, and we all benefit from that. Government benefits, we benefit, and patients benefit. So that is a thread that I think was very obvious to us during the crisis that I think is going to carry over for the next 5 and 10 years. Hopefully it never leaves us.
And I love that idea, because if you have to figure out how your opponent or ally moves in the middle of a crisis, that's the wrong time to figure that out.
That's exactly right.
But if you've got those roads paved and have that healthy dialogue and constructive conflict, I think it allows us to pivot a lot quicker during those command control times.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that, right? And you know, the government historically has not been particularly good at getting ahead of things, right? And hopefully they've learned the lessons as well and would listen to you.
So let's go to Boston, present day ABIA.
Yep.
I've been to ABIA a number of times over the years, obviously, always a big supporter and fan of your work. ABIA this year, as I looked at the roster, and I looked at the attendees, you know what I've seen more of this year?
What's that?
Bankers,
Yep.
investors.
Right.
I've seen family offices here.
Right.
So what is ABIA
Yeah.
in the midst of?
So first of all, I'm glad you noticed it because it wasn't by accident. So we've launched an investor forum this year, right, where we're trying to pull bankers, investors, private equity firms, everyone in that space to this conference to be here to do business with companies, right? And it's really important for ABIA that we represent the entire ecosystem of the MedTech community. That's a community, the investor community, that we've been connected to, but not as deeply connected as we'd like to be. They're a critical component of success for our companies, and I go back to the same thing. If they're successful and we're successful, patients' lives are changed, right? And so we feel like all the investors need to be here, and if we give them a place to gather and meet and have conversations and new business, I think they'll come. And so this is the first year of the Investor Forum. This is going to be a much bigger deal in the coming years. It's going to rival, we hope, some of the other investor conferences that you may have seen or gone to in the past on the West Coast and maybe on the East Coast too, Joe. So we're going to stay in this space. Yes.
So I'll say it. I think it's good to have a balance. JP Morgan has had its time, and we do a lot of work. I've been doing a lot of work out of there. You've been a lot of work out of JP Morgan over the years. But I wouldn't call it a straight down the middle MedTech conference. I would call it a biotech life science conference. Yeah. What I love about the ABIA is we're really focused on the MedTech industry.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if the bio and pharma folks want to come here too, we're fine with that. But we're a MedTech conference, right? So you want MedTech investors, you want MedTech banks or banks that are in the MedTech space, and you want them here. I think we do want to replicate to some degree what they're doing at JP Morgan, right? Not displace it, it's still a really important thing. I'm not sure we could displace it anyhow. But there are elements of what they do that can be carried over to this event and supplement a lot of that. Also, we do ours in the fall. That goes on in January, right? So the second half of the year, there's a lot of activity that occurs, not only closing the year, but setting up for the next year as well. And so we think there's a lot of value add for investors, bankers, and everyone to be here.
I believe next year you're on the West Coast with ABIA, but is the likelihood of us putting a flag in the ground on the East Coast potentially and counterbalancing that weight?
Well, I'll tell you, that's a possibility. I will tell you, Boston, we're going to set a record, I think, this year, number of attendees. The last time we were here was the last time we did this conference live, which is 2019, right? And we were in Boston. And when we were in Boston last time, we set a record then. And so clearly this is a great place to do business. Great town, obviously. As you and I talked before, Joe, there's a lot of investors in this space, up and down the East Coast, particularly the Mid-Atlantic all the way up to Boston. And it's just a really good place to do business. So we're thinking about it.
I have seen the over-indexing of investment money coming out of the Northeast, more so. It was on a hiatus for a couple of years, but on the MedTech side, it's really good to see that come in. And I'm also starting to see the international companies, since we've got, some of the EU issues, getting through clinicals there, getting money there. I'm starting to see the European companies come feet first onto the US instead of going to Europe first, as well as the Middle East and especially Israel are coming here. Is there any way those organizations should become familiar and get involved with ABIA at all?
They should. We have good organizations that we connect with in the international space. In Europe, MedTech Europe, we do a lot of work with, and then the companies there as well. We have a community in Israel that we connect with as well. What I'd love to see is them come here and really participate in this event and be more a part of what we do. And then we need to go there too, right? And be a part of what they're doing over there. Our business is a global business now, and it has been for a number of years, and you have to recognize that reality. There's so much innovation. You know Israel very well, Joe. I've watched a lot of the stuff you've done from there. So much innovation that goes on in Israel that we can learn from, I think, and so much they can learn from, I think, on the regulatory side from what FDA is doing over here. I think part of the reason why you're seeing some companies move this way is because the regulatory environment in the US has become so predictable and so manageable, and you know what the outcome is going to be, that you're seeing companies come in here and try this market out.
Agreed.
So,
So as we finish up, what should we be watching for ABIA through 2022, 2023 and beyond? Are there some major initiatives that our industry can help ABIA with?
Yep.
And that our viewers can get involved in?
Yeah. So let me give you one big thing. We have been working for years on trying to create a payment environment that is better for our companies, that resembles the regulatory environment at FDA. That goes for public payers and it goes for private payers as well, right? We need to have a system where once you get your product approved by FDA, you know exactly how to get it reimbursed, right? There's a system in place, it's just choppy right now for so many companies. And in the next 6 months or so, I think we're going to have a new regulation that comes out of CMS that creates a new paradigm for reimbursement for any new and emerging MedTech company. That could be huge for the industry if we get it right. So I think everybody needs to get behind this new model if we can, perfect it, make it better, but accept what we can get and try to really improve that. Because back to what you said about investors, what's the one thing that causes investors most concern?
Unpredictability.
Unpredictability. And if you look at the regulatory environment on the FDA side, it's much more predictable. If you look at the payment side, private and public, that's where the unpredictability is, right? So that's where we need to shore up things to make sure that investors have the predictability and companies have the predictability to get these new patients and the innovation pipelines into the system. So we are really, really focused on that in the next year or two. And hopefully if we get it right, for the next 5 years, it'll be a tremendous environment for MedTech globally.
And then ABIA as an organization, MedTech companies that are not part of ABIA right
Yep.
now, what should they know about ABIA and why is it one of the partners that you should get on board with?
For me, of course, I'm biased. It's the most important partner if you're in this space. Every major MedTech company is here. The investment community is coming into this. There's no place where you can network with more people who are leaders, from CEOs to business leaders to regulatory folks all the way down. Joe, you know if you walk the halls of this exhibit floor, how many CEOs that you'll see on this floor. Every major CEO is here. Every single CEO is here. And their staff is here as well, right? So being part of the ABIA community gives you access to a network of people that you might not normally get in your day-to-day business. I think it's particularly true for the small companies who are looking maybe for an opportunity for their company to be bought or to move to the next level. It's a great place and an informal way to meet people. So I would say the networking is a really important component of it. The other is the advocacy and policy work that we do. We need everybody to be a part of that community so we can ensure better outcomes in policy going forward. The small company has a unique story to tell and unique needs, and we need that to be a part of ABIA. The mid-sized company, obviously, and the large company as well. I said earlier, the ecosystem. We represent the entire ecosystem of MedTech right now, and if you want to have access to it, a great place to get it is to be a part of ABIA.
It's very true, and to your point, I was walking the floor before I finally sat down in the studio, and I mean, where else can you go? Good, Chairman Mike Minogue, right?
Right.
I walked by the ABIA booth. Mike's in the middle of the ABIA booth.
Yeah.
Not surrounded by salespeople.
Yeah.
Not surrounded by commercial peoples and KOLs.
Right.
But just there to chat with the people who may want to partner with them or potentially enhance the ABIA business.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Jeff Martha's going to be here, Robert Ford's going to be here, Kevin Lobo's going to be here, Ashley McAvoy's going to be here.
Mike Musalem's
here, the list goes on and on, right? They're all here. And as I said, it's not just them, it's their teams too, right? So it's a great place to do business.
Right.
So.
Well, as usual, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy with the conference going on right now, but always one of the primary building blocks in our MedTech industry is ABIA, and you lead it brilliantly.
Well, thank you. Thank you for what you do for the industry as well, Joe. You run a great operation. We're grateful for it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Be well, my friend.
Good.